Congratulations to Next Elements for their 3 years completion. And with that, I welcome Dr. Venkat and Dr. Sandhya to this discussion. So I will start with Dr. Venkat. Dr. Venkat is an experienced ophthalmologist over 20 years of practice, and he is the director and proprietor of Rangalakshmi Netralaya, Yelahanka. He has gold medals in ophthalmology as well as one in medicine. He has published in American Journal of Ophthalmology and Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. He is a Rotarian and has performed 1,500 free surgeries and screened over 45,000 people. Sir, welcome to the panel discussion.
Thank you, sir.
And given the pandemic situation which is prevailing last so many months, I think it's important for all of us to understand the eye and its health. Very important for students as well as for us. So we thought this is an area where we can share your expertise and guidance with all the teachers, and which will translate to the students. So I'll start with the basic question. Given the increasing online presence, how does it impact the vision and our eyes, sir?
Yeah, most pertinent questions. So I've always gone around and advocated that what we are actually experiencing is a biggest pandemic. It's not the COVID pandemic because that's going to come and go, but what's going to stay is the digital pandemonium. Literally, it's a huge pandemonium of digital invasion in one way or the other, and children have become the biggest victim of it. One of the biggest ways is simple analysis. We had done a study of over close to 270 odd children on a survey platform. And we found out that, the amount of usage as well as digital exposure has gone up from an average of 1.1 hours, which was pre-COVID era, to alarming 5.1 hours of usage on the average. Now, this is the average I'm talking, which basically means this, and this includes not just urban children, some rural children also into the population who have very less access to digital media. So in the urban era, the averages ranges goes from minimum of 4 to 5 hours to almost 8 to 12 hours of digital exposure, be it computer, be it digital exposure in terms of mobiles or television screen. There was one particular portion which showed about 6 hours of laptop usage, 3 hours of mobile usage, and additional 2 hours of television usage, which means the amount of exposure is more than the amount that they are actually sleeping. So you can imagine the amount of strain that's going to basically cause, and this is a huge thing. It's not just a digital eye strain, but we talk about this problem, we were always addressing it as computer vision syndrome, specifically for the IT companies. Whenever we had to deal with IT employees having to work 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours on the system. So we used to address them as computer vision syndrome. Now, this computer vision syndrome used to be a syndrome pertinent to most of the computer users. Now, this is going to be a bigger thing which you're going to see from childhood. So not only affecting the eyes, it's a syndrome affecting the whole body, from ergonomic positions to shoulder pains to back pains to obesity. Obesity has become a huge problem during this era of digital exposure. We are having children developing areas of malnutrition in terms of protein malnutrition, a lot of areas concerning lack of physical activity leading to number of problems. We had a child who had come and presented to us with an eye problem of developing double vision after due to this exposure. And when we went ahead and studied her, she had also landed up with obstacle problems, with problems of hormonal problems, and had led to an increase in the edema in the brain. This has directly had translated to increased intracranial tension in the brain, creating her to develop a double vision. She would have gone blind practically if she couldn't come in at the right time. So you can imagine the amount of strain and the digital strain from eye strain, eye pain, watering, eye problems, increased number of powers, a lot of children landing up with great number of powers from -6. I got a child, not a very elderly child, not that they were exposed to computers for long hours, 2 to 3 hours, a child in the first standard to the second standard grade. That child came to me with a sudden onset of total blurring of vision in one eye, and the eye had almost developed a squint to the extent that it had gone up to almost -6 power.
Wow.
So alarming, the magnitude of this problem is going to be really exploding in times to come. And I'm great that, an education forum is really taking this up in a very, very serious manner. Appreciate it.
That is really alarming. So with that, I will ask one more leading question. So what is the safe number of hours for digital exposure? And if you can answer that, I hope all our teachers and principals can actually take that message back to the students in a convincing way. And what kind of exercises that will help in these kind of situations?
Yeah, great. Two important, takeaway questions. These are both of them, because one part of it is, yes, what is the good amount of average exposure so that you can plan a kind of a curriculum in the coming time when we are all looking at a kind of a hybrid kind of a technology, hybrid platform, wherein both you might have online and offline kind of schooling. On an average, if you take a week's exposure, I will say not more than 15 hours of exposure per week, which is ideally would be spaced about 2-3 hours of exposure per day. So 5 days of 3 hours each is probably the least that or most ideal you can expect. I would like it to be a little lesser, but given the circumstances, I think we have to probably settle down for something around that. So if you probably can have a kind of a sessions wherein I will say you have a physical session of 3 hours and
Correct.
Follow it up with a 2-hour session of online at a later portion of the day itself, rather than keeping it to even 5 hours on one day. So maybe a way to think forward to. And so that will be the ideal thing. The next most important thing in this exposure is, I think parents, if they are there, they need to be guided. And the school forums and the teacher education platform, wherein you have this parent-teacher interactions, should address these things at a very high level, insisting that children are away from any digital usage 2 hours prior to sleep. Now, this is the cause of most problems. If your exposure to digital usage is there prior to sleep, I've seen children literally keeping their mobile, doing WhatsApp night before they sleep, including my daughter sometimes. And that goes on right up to the bedtime. They are there on their beds. They're not sleeping, but they are chatting right down there. And some of them just their net chat, everything is on, and then they've gone to sleep, So this is the strongest reason why you can probably develop a brain tumor. I'm sure Dr. Sandhya will throw more light on that. She comes with a lot more experience from that. So this is something which we should really address, So these things are going to become enormously worse in times to come. So that is another important takeaway, addressing parents to see to it that the child is off any digital exposure 2 hours prior to sleep. The third points are about exercises and care that needs to be taken. Ensure that the type of screen that they are using in. It's prefer that we ask children to log in on a desktop or a laptop. Avoid using the digital phone totally. If they have to use a desktop or a laptop, also ensure that it is at least close to about more than an arm's distance, which is basically ideally at least more than 4 feet. 3 feet at least from your face, and ensure that the top of your screen is 20 degrees below your eye level. That eye level at patch where you probably meet, exactly 20 degrees below that should be the top of your screen. This ensures the proper amount of ergonomics, because your eye is then working at a resting level. I have seen children basically sitting down and they are looking up like that. I doubt what's going to happen to their neck at the end of the day. And then you find children in all odd positions. They're lying down. All videos are always off on classes. I'm sure teachers will take that. In a business meeting, we can't afford to have our videos off. But children, they are now like none of the videos off. So music class going on, but videos off. Equivalent to probably not being there. So I think a lot of these things have to be inculcated into the system. Blinking the eye is the most important exercise. Literally, if we can have a slide at the end of every 20 minutes during every curriculum that tells, blink your eyes 20 times. So we do that random blinking, literally rapidly blinking your eyes as what I'm doing now. It's not just slow blinking, random blinking for 20 times every 20 minutes. I think this one thing will address a lot of problems, preventing dry eye syndrome and eye strain, and ask them to relax. Once in every half an hour, we ask the teacher to find out, okay, look outside the window and tell me 5 things that you can see. They need to look outside the window if they need to write down those 5 things that they need to see. I'm sure over a period of time, they will write it even without seeing. This is the least that we can try to prevent them from looking from the screen.
Very nice. Very nice. And I think now you can appreciate the topics that you and Dr. Sandhya are coordinating, one with eye, another with brain. So I think we will lead into that. So I'm sure teachers must be also thinking, because they're going through this challenge every day when they're teaching online classes. So it's a good one, sir. And what are the long-term effects of lower vision or poor vision in the children?
Yeah. Recently, sir, I myself was alarmed at one particular study which actually talked about, what is called as cerebral visual impairment, which we call as CVI. Now, this was found to be almost as high as 30% in preschool children itself. So we are talking this about not just grown children, preschool children who are in the formative stages of development, and their both visual development as well as mental development and physical development is taking place. So when there is a decreased amount of visual attention or visual problems, they might be seeing very well. And the worst part about the CVI, or what we call a cerebral visual impairment, is wherein the brain, visual functions in the brain are getting delayed. And this is not just with your vision. You're able to see. You make them know if this child read, they will read that 669, which we want on the chart. They will read that if you ask them to read. But they have so many other problems, spatial orientation problems, color abnormalities, field perception problems. They have a standard crowding phenomenon problem. You give them 5 letters together, they're all confused all of a sudden. You show them single letters, they are very happy seeing them. The moment you give them little crowded, they start getting problems. These are the children who will develop severe problems like, recognition problems, dyslexia problems, and other kind of, mental problems going down. So think we need to address this at a very high level, starting from the preschool, and ensuring that, all the children are assessed on a routine basis, on a day-to-day basis. At least on a, preschool children needs to be having a curriculum wherein, some kind of a curriculum wherein you have a monthly assessment to be done. And even for elderly children also, they should go a long way actually having a curriculum of visual assessment. I don't know how many schools literally follow that. Earlier, we used to have that during our childhood, during our childhood days. I remember, we had to get a kind of a specific note about what is your vision on a 3-monthly basis and details. Basically, we conduct a lot of school health programs. We do this rural schooling and urban schooling health programs wherein we conduct free camps for the schools itself. And there are a number of schools that I have approached have literally told us, saying that, that is not our prerogative. Parents, it's up to parents' prerogative. So probably it's up to the parents, basically. But I think here the problem is the parents don't have time for that. I think we need to get the teachers to do the job what the parents are doing. And as it is, teachers are, the biggest and the most ideal mentors. And parenting is all about probably ensuring many other things rather than these things.
Sure. I get that. And I'm sure it's a message for all of us as parents, as teachers, as the society. I think we should put that focus. So that leads me to ask, how often should we do these tests? And what is the early stage, or what is the age at which we should start doing this?
As I told you, sir, yes, early stage is straight away at the preschool. So even the preschool, the playgroup school, which you call, the pre-nursery school, I think screening should start right there. Like how we have when we probably admit a child, sir, we have an interview with the parent. We ensure that the parent understands the processes of learning and many such things. When my child had to get admitted to preschool, basically she was literally they felt that probably her learning skills might be low. She actually was asked to go through that psychological assessment and few things, which is kind of a standard protocol also, which now I understand is fantastic. Which basically gives you an idea as to what is the IQ of the child, or what are the capabilities of the child in some way or the other. When we want to know so much, all that development actually starts from vision. Everything is formed from vision. What you hear, your senses are the ones that form. Your IQ is actually dependent on your vision, your hearing, your abilities. So if that is not assessed in starting, how are we going to develop other things which are going to form as a result of this senses? So among them, vision is absolutely must. And how often do we do it? For a child who's now above the preschool age, I will say from first standard, an annual checkup is absolutely mandatory, no doubt about that. And then we should be selective about seeing, which children require probably even a biannual checkup. These are the things that can be thought of,
Sure. And I think as we see, this pandemic has driven a culture, and it may end up to have a blended system of education. And I think, as you mentioned, 15 hours in a week looks like an optimum, the way they should plan these blended classes. Do you say that's right?
Yes, sir, that should be right. 15 hours a week. How we space it, maybe like 2 hours or 3 hours in one day, and then maybe little more on one day, so that to just give break the monotony of classes. So if you're having one day completely online, maybe one day only offline, and then one day offline, come online. So this should probably work out with good amount of ensuring that some kind of exercises are done. That's very ideal. One of the take-home points is the 20-20-20 rule. We have all been in this era wherein we're never going to forget this 2020, and 2020 is going to be the year never forgotten in this millennium. So the same way, the 20-20 rule is very important, wherein you keep your vision 20 feet away, and ensure that you blink every 20 minutes, as I told you. And then look at a screen or a far away at any object which is more than 20 feet. That's what 6 meters is about. So look at an object which is more than 20 feet away once in every 20 minutes. And of course, the other part about is basically, breathing well during this periods and blinking your eyes 20 times at least.
Sure. And last one, before I take the audience questions, how do we implement this in majority of the schools? Is there something that has worked for you?
Yeah,
please share.
Great, sir. I think nice you brought this out. We have a very interesting, we wanted to actually analyze as to how could people screen for themselves when they are there by themselves. Now, this actually started working out when I was thinking about, at a very early stage during the pandemic. I had a patient of mine who came who was basically into marketing profession in the IT arena, but now even his marketing was online completely. So he was visiting places, but he was doing it online, which meant he was spending 12 to 14 hours on the screen. And this, he landed up with severe eye strain to the extent that he started developing double vision, headaches, nausea, vomiting, gastritis. It actually started off with a gastritis. And that's how he went here, there, got a lot of things, and then later on developed headache and then came to me. So this particular problem allowed us to basically find out. And my father at 85, he is a software professional, I might say. He's developed an app which is called the Dry Eye _ self-test. Dry Eye _ self-test. I will put it later in the chat box too. So this is a lovely app which can be used where you can actually go ahead, screen for your symptoms of dry eye. There are some standard symptoms. Most people with dry eye land up with burning, irritation, tiredness, dizziness. So you see, there are some standard symptoms, and then you just answer that, you get a score, and based on that score, one can probably quantify whether you need an assessment or don't need an assessment. So this can be tried out in the school, and I'm sure Next Element will take it up, and they are fantastic people. I've been working with them and seeing them perform great milestones, and sure they will incorporate it as a part of their package tool, wherein they can ensure that, something like this is interactive, where the parent can be guided to ask the children to take this kind of an exercise on a month-on-month basis. And you can have a report card literally out of it, saying that, this is a scorecard literally of how bad my eyes are getting or how better they are getting.
Good combination of software engineer and an ophthalmologist at home. So that's a good family combination. Thank you. And there is one question from Mr. Venkatratnam, the principal. What should be the screen size for safe vision? And also, what is the distance I should maintain from the source?
Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Venkatratnam.
Yes, sir. For the screen size, as we say, basically, ensure that they're not using the tab or the pad. That's the first part thing. Most of the children these days are either on mobile or they're very comfortable using the tab. And they are keeping it in their hand and keeping it closer to their face, lesser than a foot, literally, less than 1 feet away, which is very bad. So at least ensure that all of them are using a desktop. I will say better than even a laptop. Ensure that they're using a desktop, and all desktops these days come around the standard sizes, so that, it's not that small screen anymore. So it's much, much better and safer. And ensure that you are at least about close to, more than an arm's distance from the screen. So, which ensures that, you're at least 2.5 to 3 feet away from the source.
Thank you, Dr. Venkat. Really appreciate, and you gave us some smart tricks that we can do on our own. Really appreciate, and we look forward for more of these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Good evening, Dr. Sandhya.
Good evening.
We just heard from Dr. Venkat, and now we will lead into what happens in the brain, not just the body and the eyes and all of that. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Sandhya. Dr. Sandhya is an associate professor in neuroradiology at NIMHANS. She has a special passion in the area of functional MRI for studying the cognitive aspects and clinical relevance of the imaging techniques in various neuropsychiatric disorders. She has published 40 in her credit. And I think I want to make sure that we get best out of Dr. Sandhya type of expert to help the teachers to think about their students and how they can actually help them for what is called brain health. Dr. Sandhya, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Do you think the pandemic has affected the children? I think it's an obvious question, and we would like to know how.
Yeah. So the pandemic has affected. Initially, the kids were very thrilled that they would have a long vacation. But then over a period of time, we have seen that it has fizzled out. So, and I think if you're comparing it with the last such in the world history, if you see when was the last similar episode which has happened, it must have been World War. So is the pandemic equivalent to World War? Yes, it is, because it has caused global changes. And we may say that during World War, there was a lot of trauma and such things. And in this case, the kids were well protected, well fed. So it's like comparing a war with a space travel. So if I put the kids in a long space travel where they're well taken care of, but they're totally in a virtual environment, the kind of changes which happen is, though they are different, studies have shown that irrespective whether it's a physical pain or mental pain, the amount of damage which happens to the brain is same. So I'm sure many of the kids must have had varied spectrum from minimum to to a full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, because there are so many issues which have changed around them. And then we have pulled them from a conventional teaching environment and we have directly pushed them into a tech-driven environment. I mean, it's been an extremes of exposure. So the children are no more the same. Their baseline has totally been disrupted. So the kids which we see henceforth are definitely changed forever. So how and when, I will come to it at a later.
Equally? Dr. Sandhya?
Yes, sir.
Are all children equally affected?
So when you're talking about brain development, first thing I would like to say is the kids' brain, they are not young adults. They're kids, and the segregation of the kids by age groups, if you're doing it. So brain studies have shown that a kid from 0 to 6, you can more or less put in one group, 6 to 13 years in other group, and 15 to 21 years in other group. Yeah, up to 21 years, I will consider them as kids because the brain is still developing into an adult age. So, and how is it different? Is from the brain studies, it has shown that from 0 to 6, the kids' brains are sprouting and they will absorb whatever you throw at them, whether good or bad. They will just learn.
Correct.
From 6 to 13, it's a growing age. But that's growing age is not only of cognition, not only one aspect of cognition, which is education, but they're also developing social skills, emotional skills, team building skills, life skills. And then comes the 15 to 18-year age group, which is the adolescent age group, where actually the pruning of the networks happens. So unwanted networks are getting pruned out. And this is the age where they are more prone for risk behavior, addiction behavior, and it has been proven through studies. So it is nothing to do with volition or voluntary this one. The environment should be enriched to protect this kind of a brain growth. So the children are not of the same, we should not treat all age groups as similar. And second thing is the teacher and children bonding is a very important bonding, which has been kept away because of this online or tech-based teaching. So there is a lot of verbal and non-verbal cues which happen between the teacher and student, and a trust has to be developed between the kids. And the way the trust develops in all the 3 age groups is different. So the way the teacher interacts with the kids has to be tailored as per the age group we are seeing.
Sure. Thank you. And as a mom and as a doctor, is there some trick that you want to tell us that you follow?
I have been a very, I'm a mom who has not been available with the kids at home when the online classes were going on. Okay. I had to be at work.
Right.
So I think that my kids were up to tricks rather than me. So,
Thank you. That was good. So just for the audience sake, please share your questions in the question box. This is a very, very important topic for all of us. Okay. And what has the neuroscience taught us about education?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
What has neuroscience taught us about the education?
Okay, so the past 100 years, that is 1900 to 2000, there was a lot of study of the brain and through the route of psychology, neuroscience, neurology, through lesion studies in neurosurgery, through psychiatry, and the whole approach was a black box approach. As in, there was some input which was happening, and then they was just watching the output. Exactly how the brain works was not known because it was a black box approach. But overall, what they've seen is they've done a lot of studies over 100 years. A lot of progress has been made as to what is the role of gene and behavior, and lesion studies to know how lesion and behavior or dementia and behavior are connected. They have developed a lot of language subsystems. So when I say language, it is not just a compartmentalized model of a language. There are a lot of subsystems in the sense. There are graphemes, lexicons, phonemes, phonetics, and processing speed, grammar. So there are different aspects of language which have been subsystems which have been developed. And also, when you talk about the personality of an individual, we only don't talk about, when I talk cognition, I just don't talk about his IQ. There have also been developed quotients about emotional quotient. There's I, we, it, and it's. It's an integral model wherein we look at the emotional quotient, the social quotient of a person, the relationship quotient, what's his moral quotient, and the cognitive quotient. So there are different, there's an integral model which has been developed for the cognition. And also a lot of top-down models have been developed. For example, a brain requires a wake-sleep dreaming cycle for the memory to be embodied permanently from a short-term memory to long-term memory. And it is very important for the brain to reflect and also to have an inference, and it also requires a constant iterative feedback. So these kind of, for each pathology has been developed, not only pathology, even for normal cognition and normal healthy brain. So this has been what has been achieved over the past 100 years.
Sure. And that I think when I looked at your introduction, right, you are an expert in neuroimaging. So what can we learn from neuroimaging for the education?
Okay, so what has happened is, since the past 20 years, that is 2 decades, a lot of improvement in the technology has happened, which has helped us to study the brain. And in the opposite way, in the other way also, the brain has taught a lot of things to technology. For example, a lot of common concepts have been developed, such as convoluted neural networks, deep learning, and systematic learning, and all that there are common terms now in brain modules and in network systems, such as in software.
Correct.
So there has been a lot of things which we have learned in neuroimaging, especially with the advent of fMRI and computer systems which can handle huge data. But at the same time, I do not say that the brain and Android systems are same. Brain is something which is there is a plasticity to it, and it is a very dynamically growing brain, and the growth is non-linear. So when I put all the things together, I would say it's a spiral kind of a behavior of the brain growth. And at a crucial level, there's a critical paradigm shift happening in the cognition, as I said, in the 3 age groups. So any stress or any cognitive enhancer either takes this paradigm shift one level up or one level down. So this has been some of the concepts which have been proved by neuroimaging. And also they have done studies with whether the reading network and the writing network are different. Yes, they are different. So in a younger age group, they are exposed to concepts of reading and writing, how it affects brain. Then next is concrete topics are taught. From reading and writing, you evolve to deep learning, like math, which is more of computational based and not something which is perceived. Then you go to applications, which is more of a connecting these different things what you have learned. And then you go to an integrated approach or an abstract thinking. So over the years, the way the cognition develops is at these 4 levels. So at any one level, if there's a block, then the whole sequence gets affected. So that's what has been learned over the years. And also they have learned whether the networks of language and math are different. So it's not a compartment approach as it was thought of. So there is a different pathways for each of these networks.
Okay.
I won't go too much detail into what are the brain areas involved, but they have realized that there are different networks. But many strides have been, many myth busters have happened with neuroimaging studies. For example, there was a thing whether multilingualism is a cognitive load or an enhancer. So if you look at it from the cognitive processing aspect, yes, with multilingualism, the processing will decrease compared to a monolingual. But it also enhances your cognitive reserve, and it's much better to be a multilinguist person. So whether early intervention helps, of course, it really helps. For example, in the previous thing, I was told about vision if it is affected at a very early age. Yes, it really matters. So an early intervention, for example, a face and object recognition, if it's done very early to a kid, because he can have a face and object connection, his word reading ability is definitely, there'll be a big jump in that. So these kind of things can be studied. And is there a gender bias in the brain?
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Oh, is it?
Brain and the female brain and male brain are totally different. So it is a nature's gift. So there's no, what do you say? There is a gender bias in multiple faculties. So that has been proven objectively, scientifically. And is there any entity called learning disability? For example, I'm not a math person. There's no such term. It just maybe your method of instruction is different. And for example, the neuroscience was following a black box approach. Now with neuroimaging, you're actually seeing the brain light up. So we actually know whether there's a block at the sensory input level. Is it a block at the processing level? So new terms have come, whether like a mindset, mind block, mind blindness, such terms have come based on where the error is happening, at which level of the systems network in the brain is happening. That's what neuroimaging has taught. So a lot of myths have been busted with neuroimaging.
Excellent. I think these are new to me as well. So what in your view, with all this understanding, what should we take away as a policymaker or as a education institution? How do we take this forward?
Okay, so first I would like to say that we are dealing with kids whose cognition has been affected. They have been through a lot of trauma. There has been no kid is feigning it. There may be real anxiety issues. And when I say anxiety issues, it is not voluntary. Sometimes behavior is involuntary. For example, amygdala is the area which is the fear network area. And from there, it's a switch between the lower brain centers and the prefrontal cortex. So if the child is anxious, the prefrontal cortex, due to overload of the prefrontal cortex, the child might involuntarily lead to behavioral changes. And that is not voluntary, it's involuntary. So by understanding neuroscience, we have more empathy to such kids. I mean, normal kids who are normal till date, but due to pandemic, the kids have got affected. So we need to have a very holistic approach to a kid. We should go slow with them. We should not rush them through just because as if the floodgates are opened, and we should just not rush through their, syllabus. And we have to allow them to recover to the baseline, and cognition takes time. It is not like very next day you can switch over. So this the teacher should understand, and the institute should also understand, even the policy maker. And we should identify what are the core areas which are required for me to jump from one particular age group to another age group. We should trim away all the rest of the syllabus in a pyramid manner. In the sense, the youngest age group, we should focus on, like as I said, face object recognition and such things, and give more focus on that. And slowly, maybe higher up the syllabus can be less trimmed because their adaptabilities are better. So core areas should be recognized. And what we have learned from the brain is, the brain works in different subsystems and integrates everything. So similarly, we should develop an integrated approach to education. For example, STEM learning is one, but I do not know, I did go through if there's any cognitive studies on STEM learning. It is very vague, so I'm not promoting any kind of a method. But I would like to say that all subjects should be integrated in one particular manner. For example, art and language can be combined, science, social, physics, and math. So, concept learning should be focused on, skill development should be focused on, and we should use hybrid methods. We should use technological aids since we have already invested in them, so that many kids, where I said, who may have mind blocks or mind blindness, so in such things, these aids can help them to overcome. All kids are not same. And of course, few studies we have done on meditation also. I would focus on a lot on physical activity to be regained because the kids have been away. And when I say physical activity, it not only enhances your physical strength, but it is also a cognitive enhancer. It helps you in sustained attention. It helps in developing eye contact, life skills, social skills. So there are a lot of things which you develop, and that has been proven through neuroimaging. And we should have a mindful minute or we should ask them to have focused breathing skills so that it enhances their cognition.
Sure.
So these are some of the take-home messages I would like to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Sandhya. I think you tried your best to package this in a short duration. I do really appreciate. With that, I think I want both of you, Dr. Venkat, Dr. Sandhya, be assured that the audience, roughly 200, all influential people on this call, who can actually make some changes to thousands and thousands of students. It's in their hands how they can actually take this forward. So your time, your wisdom will be really be leveraged by all these dignitaries in this call. To the folks in the audience, please reach out to Next Element if there are further discussions, further questions, anything that we can help in these areas. Please reach out to Next Element. So I thank Next Element and congratulate on their 3rd year celebration. Please go ahead, Dr. Venkat.
I had an interesting observation and a question also to Dr. Sandhya. Thank you for this lovely platform. I could interact with you. Neuroplasticity is, a very, very special topic, and it's a very interesting topic always, which I have been reading also a lot about. Among them, basically, I just figured out there was an article recently which showed that during this pandemonium, we have got a lot of kids, especially the early learning kids, where they've literally, forgotten certain aspects of learning, which include probably, just forgetting certain aspects of division, forgetting certain aspects of mathematics. Is it because of a different type of an overload that the brain is actually now receiving? Is it some kind of a suppression mechanism that's happening?
So basically, if you look at the white matter tracks, when in a young age group, they're just sprouting. If you don't put and when I'm teaching a certain, suppose language, there are multiple brain areas which are getting lit up. So when you're giving also and all sensory input should be used. It's not only visual; it should be touch, it should be auditory, everything. So when you're going on online mode, all this doesn't happen. And so because they're getting sprouted, if you don't use them, they will not sprout. So basically, that's for a younger age group. But in an older age group, they are also at risk for addiction, is because it is getting pruned, and you're asking the wrong networks to stay, and you're asking the essential networks to prune. And so both these age groups are very, at risk groups. The sprouting and the middle age, they're missing out on social quotient. They may be in future maybe more socially isolated. They may feel technology is their friend. So different kids have different kind of an impact of this pandemic.
Correct. Perfect. Very nicely gotten. The neural networks are getting jammed. Absolutely. That's the problem.
Good. I think it was interesting conversation. Again, I thank you both. Great insights. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.